Chicago is preparing to host its second NASCAR street race.
The entire course is like a misshapen figure eight that goes on for 2.2 miles or about 3.5 kilometers. Last year's version was the first street course race NASCAR had ever held.
While the visible parts of transforming this area just takes a few weeks, the engineering and the planning for this incredible spectacle has been taking place over the course of years. What I've been fascinated by throughout this entire time is how many scales of design, engineering, and planning decisions that all have to work together in order for something like this to happen. And I think it really starts with the car itself.
Back in 2019, NASCAR introduced what they call the Next Gen NASCAR. It took 4 years to implement, so the first year of these cars competing in races was 2022, the year before the first Chicago race. Before that, it had been 10 years since a new generation of car was adopted. The new design, which looks more like a regular car than previous generations did, also takes advantage of technologies that were developed in the intervening decade to make the cars safer, more agile, cheaper, and more difficult for rich racing teams to modify. This keeps competition closer and hopefully more engaging, since the same teams just won't be winning all the time. That said, racing on streets puts completely new demands on a car that, until now, has been designed specifically to race on prepared surfaces, especially in the form of banked oval tracks.
Certain features, such as the solid axle and the slippery aerodynamics, made it unsuitable for racing anywhere else. But the new generation introduces technology that keeps the cars performing at a high level on a broad range of conditions and different road surfaces.
That old solid rear axle was a simple and effective means for transferring power of the engine to the rear wheels, but it's not great at dealing with uneven surfaces. The new cars have an independent rear suspension, and I'll let Mona Lisa Vito from My Cousin Vinny explain what that means.
The 64 Skylark had a solid rear axle, so when the left tire would go up on the curb, the right tire would tilt out and ride along its edge, but that didn't happen here. The tire marks stayed flat and even. This car had an independent rear suspension.
It also has a transaxle, which puts the transmission in the back, balancing out the weight of the car so it's closer to a 50-50 distribution between the front and the back. When the car goes around a turn a bit too quickly, it loses a bit of grip and rotates around the center of mass. When this weight is distributed unevenly, that rotation happens in less predictable and controllable ways. If the front's heavy, the car will understeer, going straight through the corners. But when the rear is heavy, it oversteers and spins out. The suspension of the new car also adds more points of adjustability to be able to accommodate a larger variety of racing surfaces. The new cars have better brakes, larger wheels, and lower profile tires, which all help with grip, cornering, and slowing down. These qualities are all needed in abundance on city streets, well, not so much while turning left around an oval. Then the NASCAR teams lightened the body by making it out of composite instead of steel. They also include all kinds of aerodynamic improvements that introduce downforce. The faster the car goes, the more the aero works to push the car down on the road while helping to maintain the stability at high speeds. On ovals, banking the turns does that work, but everywhere else you can't rely on slopes to generate downforce.
So, the new generation of cars was announced in 2019. That same year, NASCAR began its hunt for a location to create a brand new race that would take advantage of the new car's capabilities. Bringing races into a downtown promises to build a fan base with urban demographics. A downtown destination, it brings people to the city that might be avoiding it otherwise, and then people in the city are presented with a form of spectacle that they wouldn't normally seek out.
Turns out, though, that Chicago has a very long history with motorsports, and NASCAR specifically. Funny enough, in 1956 and 57, there were NASCAR races right near the current one, just a bit southeast in Soldier Field where the Bears play, for now. Soldier Field was actually one of the most popular motorsport venues in the world at the time. In 1947, for instance, auto races were held there nearly every weekend from June all the way until the end of September. This history has built up a deep fan base in and near Chicago, making the city a pretty natural fit in the eyes of the marketing team. It represents the third largest demographic in the world for NASCAR.
But that doesn't answer the most interesting question. Where exactly in the city should the course go?
While there were three main entities working on that problem, it's the third partner at this stage that seems particularly unique. It's iRacing, the virtual simulation racing platform. Before iRacing entered the mix, the city suggested Grant Park for pretty obvious reasons. It's filled with iconic landmarks, it already hosts huge gatherings like Lollapalooza and the Marathon, and it's well served by multiple forms of transportation. NASCAR can see the obvious benefits of this area because the streets are wide and there's plenty of staging areas for teams and cars, and it's easy to access.
But iRacing is what allowed everyone to determine the particular details of the course and how everything associated with it should be positioned and prepared. For those of you who are unfamiliar, iRacing isn't like just a driving game that you would play on your Xbox. It's an actual racing simulator that's designed to run on computers.
Racers practice and compete virtually on tracks that are digitized from real-world locations to create what you might call a digital twin of those tracks. A digital twin is a highly detailed virtual replica of a physical location in the world, and they're created using data collected through various means, such as laser scanning, photogrammetry, and geospatial mapping. This digital representation allows for precise simulations and testing by mirroring real-world conditions and environments. The iRacing platform, as a version of this kind of digital twin, it can interface with sim racing rigs that translate between the digital and real-world forces. With a special steering wheel, pedal box, and in some cases a seat that moves around, racers actually feel the forces of the car and then can respond accordingly. iRacing kicked off their part of the process by gathering the geospatial data for the area and creating a basic general model. They use laser scanning or LiDAR in combination with photogrammetry to capture the precise details of the buildings, the terrain, and every physical feature of the streets that they could. In this virtual version, they mapped and tested various design ideas until they arrived at this 12-turn configuration. The map is calibrated to include a mixture of turns, from 90-degree obstacles to long sweepers.
After mapping it out, they tested it by racing on it, virtually.
Real drivers, virtual cars, virtual circuit, and we're under green.
In June 2021, the NASCAR iRacing Pro Invitational Series brought together professional NASCAR drivers, sim racing experts, and other invited participants to compete on the new Chicago course. They raced around the course 51 times to a live crowd watching on FS1. The virtual event drew similar audience numbers as a regular race.
Even though people were watching it, race organizers identified some real problems with their proposed layout. It was just too hard to race, and it wasn't even all that fun to watch.
You know where all the traffic is? In the garage. They're all broke. About half the field is going to finish.
And it wasn't safe for the drivers or the spectators. This required some adjustments. First, the racing issue. The surfaces of Chicago streets, they were just not good enough, even with the new car's capabilities.
Using data from the virtual race, NASCAR was able to pinpoint the sections that disrupted the cars and either caused crashes or just created undue stress on the drivers that didn't really have any payoff in the racing dynamics.
Then, they resurfaced and smoothed out the parts of the real streets prior to the actual race. In areas where the angle or the camber of the streets presented any issues, these were adjusted as well to improve vehicle stability and handling.
They added more areas for passing on the course and areas for cars to roll out of the way in the event of a crash. And boy, were there a lot of crashes.
Oh no! Now how do you fix that?
Gosh, the whole thing blocked up.
Oh, he spun out by himself. So he wrecked it big. I did not do that for everyone watching. That was not me.
This was a huge problem. So they addressed problematic areas like pit road by adjusting its length where the cars would enter and exit so they could do it more safely. They also found the sharp turns slowed things down too much, and they created pileups and bottlenecks in the race. So they eased some of the turns, especially at 1 and 6. And all this was meant to help make the racing more enjoyable to watch. Part of this also meant adjusting grandstands for viewing angles and to ensure spectator safety.
That spectator safety part is really interesting. They were able to use the crash data to pinpoint exactly where to beef up safety measures. In these critical zones, the barriers were made taller or doubled up to make sure that no debris from a car could injure spectators or damage nearby buildings. Interestingly, the barriers that line the course were designed specifically for that task and made by specialists from around the globe.
The base part is relatively standard and made of concrete and built locally by Avon Precast, about 30 miles south of downtown Chicago. But even though they're standard, that doesn't mean that they aren't impressive. Each one weighs 10,000 pounds or 4,500 kilograms, and they're 12 feet long by 4 feet high, or 4 meters by 1.3 meters. In total, Avon made 2,200 of these, and hundreds more are available in nearby cities just in case they're needed. But these are so massive that only 4 can be moved at a time. It takes over 500 trips to move all of them. The concrete holds an especially designed netting system that was designed by a Swiss company named GeoBrug. They specialize in rockfall barriers. That's something that's needed much more in Switzerland than Chicago typically. Rockfall barriers protect people and cars from debris that's falling down mountains. Here, they're re-engineered to protect the mountainous skyscrapers and people from the debris flying off cars. The connection details and the brackets between the net and the concrete were designed in Germany and then fabricated in Tennessee by another company that also installed it all.
NASCAR invested about $50 million into this project, and it generated an estimated $100 million for the city of Chicago. And even though this first race was more like a slip and slide, the organizers saw it as a success. Many Chicagoans, on the other hand, believe that holding the race here is a little bit misguided. But a lot of people that I talk to just appreciate how the event allowed them to see the city in a new way.
Road racing in cities certainly is not new. It's a scenario that's been solved with other kinds of race cars and other streets and layouts around the world. But Chicago presents something unique, with its skyscrapers and dense landmarks that permeate the course and the frames of the cameras that record the action on it. Also, the fact that this course was designed so recently means that it was able to take advantage of the latest in engineering and testing for the event to kick off with the greatest number of problems solved before the green flag was ever waved.
We can't control the crazy weather that we had last year, but following a process like this one, I think demonstrates just how effective that our tools can be for solving big problems. Now, if we could just target those tools to some of the more pressing problems that we're facing, then maybe this kind of effort can go toward making even more meaningful impacts and changes for cities like Chicago.
The race is just around the corner, and while you're gearing up for watching it or even traveling to Chicago to see it in person, there's something else that you need to be prepared for: protecting your personal data. I've had my share of annoying junk mail and robocalls, and it turns out it's because my data was being sold by data brokers. They scour the internet to find your personal information in order to sell that information without you even knowing. They have your name, your address, your phone number, shopping habits, possibly even your social security number, all up for the highest bidder. But Incogni is here to help. Incogni targets the brokers with your data, and they demand it be removed on your behalf. When you sign up, you can see exactly how many companies have your data. For me, it was hundreds. And while that's scary, it's super satisfying watching them get deleted one by one. The process is simple. Create an account, grant Incogni the right to act on your behalf, and then sit back and relax while they handle everything. Your data stays protected too, because they work continuously. If it gets collected again, Incogni is there to get it scrubbed from the market. No more intrusive calls and ads, and you're free to enjoy the architecture and the race. So head to Incogni.com by clicking the link in the description. It gets 60% off this incredible level of protection when you use the code Stewart Hicks. Again, to get 60% off, just click on the link that's on the screen right now or down in the description and use the code Stewart Hicks. Stay safe, and as always, thanks for watching.